In this step, let's focus on Spring Security Authorization. There are two approaches to Spring Security Authorization. One is to use global security and the other one is to go for method security. Now, one of the things I would do is to disable JWT authentication and enable the configuration that we had for basic auth. So what I would do is I would go to JWT authentication resource. I would comment the REST controller in here, save this, and I would also do the same thing on the JWT security configuration. I'll organize imports on both these files so that we don't have any warnings. Let's organize imports and let's go to basic auth security and let's enable configuration. If I'm using JWT security, each time I make a code change, I would need to regenerate the JWT. So it will be a little tedious. Let's save ourselves all that work by going back to basic auth security configuration. You should see that the application would start up fine. I can fire a request to the get to-dos by using basic authentication. So I can go and say add authorization and say user is in 28 minutes and dummy and say set. So we are using basic authentication now and say send. We are able to get the details back. Let's start with talking about global security. One of the ways of configuring global security is in authorized HTTP requests. We created the filter chain earlier. So basic auth security configuration. This is where you can go ahead and configure more authorization related things. So over here, I can say, for example, this specific URL should have a role of user. For example, something like this can be done in here. You can also configure something like if anything starts with admin. So admin /*, you should have a role of admin. So you can configure URI based authorizations directly in here. You also have different matchers. You have has role, has authority, has any authority, is authenticated. You can use any of these matchers to configure your authorization rules. In addition, you also can configure method security. The thing is, if you want to use method security, you need to enable it. So I would go ahead and enable it in here. Enable method security. If you organize imports, you'd see an import with a huge package name and enable method security. So Arc Spring Framework security config annotation method configuration. Enable method security. So once we enable method security, you'd be able to go and use things like pre and post annotations. You can say to access this method, the user needs to have a role of user. And you can configure additional conditions as well. Let's try and play with this specific one. So I'll go into our resource and add this in. So we have our to-do resource, which we created earlier, and retrieve to-dos for specific user is the method we would want to play with. I would go in here and say pre-authorize has role user. And the other condition we are adding in is that the name, the user name in here should match the name in the authentication. So whatever path variable which is being passed in here should be matching the name we have in authentication. The name we have in authentication is in 28 minutes. So let's wait for the server to restart, pick it up, and let's go back to our request and send. Success. However, if you change this to anything else, let's say users dummy, what would happen? This dummy would match up against this path variable, and this would be dummy, this would be in 28 minutes, and therefore they would not match. Let's do send. You can see that you are getting a 403 back. It's saying forbidden. So this would ensure that somebody with the username in 28 minutes can only access the to-dos of in 28 minutes. You can also do things like post authorize. In the return object, you can check if the username is in 28 minutes. Let's do that right now. Over here, I'll add in this post authorize. We are returning a return object with username in 28 minutes. Let's organize imports, save this. So let's go back to users in 28 minutes to-dos, right? Send. This would be successful. Why? Because in the return object, what is the username? This is the first one which is going to be returned back, to-do list.get of 0. So this would be the one which would be returned back. And in that, the name is in 28 minutes. So it will be returned back properly. Let's say I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this to in 28 minutes 1. What would happen? Fingers crossed. Go in there and say send. Aha, 403. Why? Because post authorization failed. The return value, the return object contains username which is different from in 28 minutes. And therefore, the post authorize failed and we are getting a 403. Now, if I change this to in 28 minutes back again and click send again, you'd see that I would get a 200 back. Pre and post are the recommended approaches to implement method level security. You can also implement method level security using JSR 250 annotations. To be using JSR 250 annotations, you need to enable JSR 250 enabled is equal to true. So you'd need to go in and put this out there. In our basic auth security configuration at the top, you would need to add this in. JSR 250 enabled is equal to true. And you can configure the roles allowed. Admin, user. So let's go in here. So let's go back to our to-do resource and add in add roles allowed. If you organize imports, you would see that roles allowed is imported in as well. You can see Jakarta annotation, security, roles allowed. You can also see that there are other annotations like deny all and permit all in here. So for now, let's focus on roles allowed, admin and user. And if you go ahead and fire a request, you should see that this would still succeed. However, if let's say I change this admin 1 and user 1 and say send, you'd see that we are getting back 403 because this role is not present on it. So let's go ahead and change them back, admin, user. So you can use JSR 250 annotations by enabling method level security with the attribute JSR 250 enabled is equal to true. You can also use the old @secured annotation, which is provided by Spring. To enable this, you need to say secure enable is equal to true. So you need to go in. So let's go into the basic auth security configuration. And over here, in addition to JSR 250, let's also enable secure enabled is equal to true. And I'd go over to our resource and define this condition @secured with these roles. I will say admin 1, user 1. These roles don't exist. So let's say organize imports. You can see that secured is imported in org Spring Framework security access annotation secured. And if I fire in a request, I'm getting a 403 back. If I change this back to admin and user and fire a request, @secured actually checks against the authorities. So what we would need to do in here is instead of admin 1, user 1, we can type in role underscore admin. So the name of the role is admin, but when it becomes an authority, it would be role underscore admin and role underscore user. So this is how we can check it. Now you can go ahead and say send, and you'd see that the request succeeds. So what we are looking at are the different method security annotations that are present. The recommended approach, as far as I'm concerned, is to make use of the @pre and @post. This provides you with a lot of flexibility, and this is the modern approach. If you want to be compliant with standards, you can go with JSR 250 annotations. In the last few steps, we played around a lot with Spring Security. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time, and I'll see you in the next step.